Loving versus Virginia, 1967, the controversial case that rocked the century. In 1958, Richard and Mildred Loving were arrested at night in their bedroom by the sheriff of Caroline County, Virginia. Their crime was being married to each other. The Lovings, Mildred, who was of African American and Native American descent, and Richard, a white bricklayer, were ordered by a judge to either serve a year in jail or leave Virginia for
At
25
home
years.
in the middle of the night.
They asked Richard who was that woman he was sleeping with. And I said, I'm his wife. And the sheriff said, not here, you're not.
Richard and Mildred Loving were an interracial couple who lived in Virginia. When they met, Richard was 17 and Mildred was a young, skinny 11-year-old with the nickname String Bean. Their parents lived in the country near Central Point, and their families knew each other. When they were both old enough, they started to spend time together at drag races because Richard and Mildred's brother were friends and they enjoyed fixing and racing cars together. When Mildred became pregnant at 18, they decided to do the right thing and get married. They both said their initial move was not to challenge the Virginia law. Richard took Mildred to Washington, D.C. to get married and came back to live in Virginia as a married couple. The state of Virginia, along with many other states in the country at that time, did not allow people of different race to get married. In 1958, 24 states had laws banning interracial marriage, also known as anti-miscegenation laws, including Texas, Virginia, and most of the South. Anti-miscegenation laws, or miscegenation laws, were laws that enforced racial segregation at the level of marriage and intimate relationships by making interracial marriage between members of different races a crime. The term miscegenation, the mixing of two or more races, was first introduced in 1864 during President Lincoln's re-election. The word was created by combining misere and genus, race. Although interracial relationships have been common in American society and culture since the colonial days of Jamestown, anti-miscegenation legislation prohibited mixed-race marriage for most of American history. Following the Civil War, anti-miscegenation legislation remained from the days of slavery and white supremacy. In June of 1958, Richard applied for a marriage license and took Mildred Jeter to Washington, D.C., where it was legal to get married. They came back to Virginia to live with Mildred's family. Mildred did not know that interracial marriage was illegal in Virginia. On a quiet July night, a month later in the middle of the night, Richard and Mildred were abruptly awoken when the county sheriff and two deputies burst into the room and shined flashlights in their eyes.
Mrs. Loving, what has been the worst part about all this for you?
I guess the worst thing was spending a little time in jail. That's the worst.
The Lovings showed their marriage certificate, but the sheriff told them that it was no good in their state and arrested them. Richard spent one night in jail and was bailed out by his family. Richard tried to bail Mildred out of jail, but was told that if he continued, he would go back to jail. Mildred spent 5 days in jail before being bailed out by her father. Soon after, the trial took place. Both were charged with violating Virginia's Racial Integrity Act of 1924. The Lovings were sentenced to 1 year in jail, but the sentence was suspended if the couple left the state and did not return together for the next 25 years. The racism and anger of the judge, Leon Bazile, was clear when sentencing. Almighty God created the races white, black, yellow, Malay, and red, and he placed them on separate continents, and but for their interference with his arrangement, there would be no cause for such marriages. The fact that he separated the races shows that he did not intend for the races to mix. Immediately following the ruling, the Lovings moved to Washington, D.C. Mildred ended up becoming pregnant and went back to Virginia to have her baby. Richard came as well for the birth, but when it was discovered that they were in the state, they were both arrested again. The Lovings explained that they thought they could come back to Virginia to have their child. The jail time was suspended and the Lovings went back to Washington, D.C. After a few years, in 1963, Mildred was very homesick and didn't like city life because she felt confined and missed the country where kids could run and play. So when their older son Sidney got hit by a car, Mildred finally did something about their situation and wrote to Attorney General Robert Kennedy asking if the Civil Rights Act could help them. It was a simple but convincing letter. Kennedy wrote back saying he could not help but suggested that they contacted the ACLU. A young lawyer volunteering for the American Civil Liberties Union, Bernard S. Cohen, took their case. Cohen petitioned Caroline County Circuit Court Judge Leon Bazile to set aside his verdict, but was refused, so he began to work on the case through the appeals process. In July of 1966, Philip J. Hirschkopf, a law student, was introduced by his professor to Bernard Cohen. Hirschkopf was familiar with civil rights law and was a good addition as a partner. In a personal interview with Mr. Hirschkopf, he stated that it was a very busy and fast-paced time for him. He met Cohen in July, had a draft to file a federal suit by the end of July, was offered a job to work with Cohen in August, and the suit was filed with the Supreme Court by September. Miscegenation laws hit harder than other segregation acts, and the theory behind them leads to problems in all areas of law. This is because they make interracial marriage void from the start, so all children are illegitimate, spouses have no inheritance rights, and heirs cannot receive death benefits.
Negro people in the badges and bonds of slavery. The outrageous civil effects of these statutes are not always apparent right away. For example, if Richard Loving were to die, then Mildred Loving would not be able to collect Social Security benefits as his widow.
In 1958, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "When any society says that I cannot marry a person, that society has cut off a segment of my freedom." In April of 1967, the lawyers Bernard S. Cohen and Philip J. Hirschkopf argued the Loving case before the Supreme Court. Cohen argued for the due process, and Hirschkopf argued for equal protection of civil rights under the 14th Amendment. Neither Richard or Mildred attended the trial.
No one can articulate it better than Richard Loving when he said to me, "Mr. Cohen, tell the court I love
While
my
waiting for
wife."
the decision, Richard and Mildred quietly moved back to Virginia, but not to Caroline County. The couple did not like publicity and were very private during all of this time. In an interview with Life magazine, Richard Loving said, "We have thought about other people, but we are not doing it just because somebody had to do it and we wanted to be the ones. We are doing it for us." In 1965, Life magazine sent a photographer, Gray Valet, to document their story. Richard and Mildred refrained as much as possible from being in the press, but Valet was good at gaining their confidence. The Lovings trusted him and felt like he was a safe friend. Gray chose to concentrate on them as he did in other essays he worked on, and focused on their relationship and their love story. Gray took many photos of the Lovings between the spring of 1965 and the court ruling in 1967, but they were not publicly displayed until after the trial. On June 17, 1967, the Supreme Court finally reached a unanimous decision and ruled that it was unconstitutional to keep two individuals who loved each other from marrying, no matter what the race. Anti-miscegenation laws are in violation of the 14th Amendment, which protects civil rights from being denied to any American citizen. The decision on behalf of the Lovings was unanimous. Chief Justice Earl Warren justified their marriage, saying that marriage was one of the basic civil rights of man. Chief Justice Warren wrote, "Under our Constitution, the freedom to marry or not to marry a person of another race resides with the individual and cannot be infringed by the state. These convictions must be reversed." The Lovings were now allowed to live in Virginia legally after 9 years of waiting and fighting. After moving back to Virginia, Richard built a house for his family, and they lived together for 8 happy years. Tragically, Richard was killed and Mildred lost sight in one of her eyes when a drunk driver hit their car. She was 35 years old and never remarried or considered it. Mildred Loving died in 2008 after being sick for 3 years. The two Loving boys also passed due to natural causes, but their sister lived on to tell the story of her parents and the legacy that it leaves today. A study by the Brookings Institute found a jump in numbers of interracial couples all across races in the United States. According to this study, up to 8.4% of new marriages were interracial, compared to 0.4% in 1960. Virginia's multiracial population increased by 63.1% from 2000 to 2010. My parents are a part of the growing percentage of interracial marriage. They were married in 2001 in the state of Texas without any thought of breaking the law or worrying about being arrested. Love triumphs all was not always a reality for interracial couples, but now everyone has the freedom to marry who they choose regardless of race. The case of Loving versus Virginia helped pave the way for recognizing the rights of all people. In the last 40 years, the Loving decision has been a cornerstone for interracial couples and their children, as well as the guide for the LGBT community, which is gaining ground in the struggle for their own marriage rights. Today, many interracial couples of all colors are allowed to live and love with each other happily because of the Lovings. If not for this couple who were caught up in one of the biggest controversies of the century, many people, like my own parents, would not be able to marry. The legacy of the Lovings will continue throughout history and increase the population of interracial couples, and biracial children is living proof. Richard and Mildred Lovings paved the way for a new time that will affect generations of people, and not just different races, but of different sexual orientation as well. But few know that the court case Loving versus Virginia, Kenton Abe is working to change that. He created a website that encourages celebrating in honor of the anniversary on June 12th, Loving Day. Mildred Loving died in May 2002, but before her death, 40 years after the court's decision, Mildred released a statement saying, "I am proud that Richard's and my name is on a court case that can help reinforce the love, the commitment, the fairness, and the family that so many people, black or white, young or old, gay or straight, seek in life. I support the freedom to marry for all. That's what Loving and Loving are all about."